In this video, I'm going to be talking about level of detail in your environments. A really good piece of suggestion if you ever want to finish more complex scenes is to learn where to put details without going too overboard to the point that you're just never going to get anything done. So this is one of my artworks. I did this picture a couple of years ago, and there's one particular part of it that I've gotten some questions from people before, and that's the area that's behind the chain link fences. Some people have asked me whether or not that cityscape is a photo or if I actually hand painted it. And to address that question, it is actually hand painted, but it's a lot simpler than you might think it is. If I were to remove the chain link fence textures from in front of it, and if I zoom in here, you'll see just how crudely painted this cityscape in the background is. And this seriously took me very little time to do. You'll notice that when you see it from far away, it looks very complete. It looks like there's absolutely no doubt in your mind that that is a cityscape in the background. But there are two elements to this part of the scene that lead to me having to do almost no serious work to it. Number one is that the chain link fence in front of this obscures most of the broad featureless details, and your brain tries to fill in the rest as to what's behind the chain link fence. The second part of it is the atmospheric perspective at play here. There is heavy haze, and these elements are very low contrast. So I don't really have to worry about a lot of the more minute details because at this distance, even with the naked eye, you wouldn't really see them very much anyway. And this really is exactly how implied detail works. Yes, what you're looking at right now is a painting and not a line drawing, but this general idea carries over to anything that you're going to do. If this background were drawn with lines rather than blocks of color, I would have done this exactly as sketchy and featureless as it was if it were painted. If you're curious, by the way, as to how this was painted, if you look closely, you'll see that there's a general sort of noisy texture that's underneath all of the broad brush strokes, and that fills in a lot of the detail that you would generally see in a cityscape. Things like smaller buildings, smaller features, lamps, trees, you name it, anything that would be strewn about. Then I just take a slightly broad square brush, and with light and dark colors, I just paint vertical lines to indicate these larger, smoother faced buildings. And then when I zoom out again and turn back on the chain link fence, you'll see it's quite a convincing optical illusion. In this other artwork that I did, also a couple of years ago, I'm going to zoom into this bottom corner over here onto these distant buildings and just show you that the actual line drawing on these is handled very simplistic as well. The closer I get here, let's see. You can see at this distance, I'm not entirely concerning myself with keeping the lines extremely perfect. There are some very simple details here, but I'm not going overboard with them. The stairwells on the side of this building are not entirely consistent in their floor-to-floor height. The windows are just tiny squares. Even things like the distant trees coming out from the left side of the building, it's just sort of like a squiggly line that I fill in with color later. And it's really down to the fact that these are small objects in the overall scene. When you see the entire picture from afar, none of these details read as crudely as they do here. And this saves so much time. I'm not going to draw a building like these distant ones here as detailed as I am more close-up ones. And down below, you'll see that I've done more of this extremely simplistic building cityscape painting, just implying detail rather than showing real detail, because once again, from afar, it reads fine. And you are never going to see these artworks up this close anyway, not even in print form. And going back and speaking about atmospheric perspective, let's take a look at the actual levels of detail in this scene, which you remember from a couple videos back. So if I remove the haze layer here and zoom in on this distant landmass with the structures on top, you'll see that the entire mass itself is simply one solid color, with only some very, very base level lighting applied to it and an extremely simple texture, which, as far as I know, this probably only took me about a minute to do. Since it's so distant and so obscured by the atmospheric perspective, most of the details, if I had painted them in anyway, would have faded to obscurity. Compare that to the parts of the scene up close, like down on the ground here, and you'll see that I spent much more time putting in details in the texture of the ground, because we would definitely see those even at standard web resolution. And lastly, just to show some line drawings for level of detail here, this particular drawing is a pretty complete panel from a comic I did back in 2009. You'll see that as the objects recede more and more into the distance, I put less and less detail in them. And the reason for this is because you don't want your scene to be chock full of detail all the way back as far as you can see. That can actually harm the way your picture looks because it will appear too busy. There will be too much going on. A large part of knowing how much detail to put and where will not only help you finish the picture faster, but create a better looking picture by the end. Reserving more detail for the areas that matter more will lead viewers to look at those areas and respond to them more immediately. When coming up with ideas either for your own work, or if you're creating work for concept purposes for a project, or let's say if you were to ever work in a professional studio, a lot of the time, getting your ideas down as quickly as possible is the best course of action. This means sacrificing quality for speed. But if the only people who are ever going to see these drawings are maybe you, someone else, if you want feedback, or maybe just an art director, then really rough sketches like this are really all that is required to begin getting feedback to know where you should probably go next. Or in the worst case, if the idea is rejected entirely, at least you didn't spend a lot of time on it, so no big deal. In this rough sketch called Cartographer's Kitchen, the basic idea here was that I wanted to convey some sort of explorer or pioneer who doesn't exactly have a lot of space to work with to draw up his maps and for exploring the nearby area. So he set up his little studio inside of his kitchen here. I wasn't concerning myself too much on what the actual look of a lot of the objects in this room should be like. I simply had an idea in my head that there would be something like a drafting table, a light box table, probably a much larger map on the wall that he's using for some sort of point of reference, and of course this is a kitchen, so there would be, typical kitchen stuff like the fridge and counters and cabinets. But then there's the pantry in the corner, which I thought would be funny if he turned it into some sort of server room for communications back to where he came from. A sketch like this took me no more than about 20 to 25 minutes, and this is a pretty good amount of time to flesh out an idea like this. When you're starting out, it will obviously take longer since you're not used to simply creating random elements and details through muscle memory. But if you keep at it, eventually you'll be able to hammer out work like this in no time at all. And that's about all I have for this particular video. I hope this little bit of insight helps you on the creation of your sketches for your project, as well as potentially your prospective future as an artist. At the start of Unit 4, we're going to be taking a look at how to find various inspiration around the internet and proper use for reference material. Have fun on your project, guys, and I'll see you later.